a good transition. We were speaking about content here during this panel, and we now have a content specialist for social media, and she will give you some tips and how to for your content strategy online. And that's the first line is how to create content that gets served to users organically, but also is effective as an ad. Was an interesting description for a session. Addie Conner, co-founder and chief innovation officer of SocialCode, will be the presenter of this session. Help me welcome Addie Conner.
I'm Addie. I'm here today to talk to you about the future of advertising, which is also synonymously titled The Future of Content on my slide. Cool. So when we think about advertising and we think about good advertising, we're generally not talking about digital. That's just been sort of the way that history's evolved. We think about that. Think about Coca-Cola. Mostly we're thinking about print and we're thinking about TV advertising. When we think about digital, we're actually thinking about things that are more disruptive, spammy. It's sat off to the side. How do I get the biggest red flashing button to increase my click-through rate to get people to click on my ads? Then, as we've sort of gone from, maybe sitting on the right hand and trying to get people to click a flashing red button, and now we've existed in people's news feeds, we've moved to this, and we've got cats. And we've got people who are chasing things like engagement as a KPI rather than as a signal. So digital advertising has sort of long suffered from being sort of this thing that sat off to the side, this thing that had to be disruptive, and then in social, this thing that was really siloed and small. To get brands to not think about it as sort of part of their business and part of their overall KPI strategy, but as a separate initiative or something that needs to be thought of as different. But things have changed, and dynamics are changing, and canvases are changing, and we're actually moving to sort of a new era, which is digital storytelling, where no longer is digital advertising about spamming, but we've moved to be able to tell stories to our customers, much like we have for years and years and years on TV and on print. We have a different canvas now, and before we were this thing off to the side, but now we actually have bigger reach. And I think it's reach that's really changed the conversation, where Facebook now is 25% of all impressions and where people spend their time. Facebook plus Instagram on mobile is 25% of mobile time. That's where your customers are now. This is what they're doing. And no longer are these ads sitting off to the side. They're actually taking up the entire mobile phone, and they are their entire view of what's happening at that moment. So brands no longer are trying to disrupt, but rather they're trying to inject organically into the conversation. And ads are no longer this thing that is separate and developed by the banner creation shop, but they're an extension of a brand's organic voice, what they're doing in the owned and earned construct. And really ads are now just thinking of a distribution channel for the content and for the stories that you want to tell your customers. But tell your customers where they are and at the time that it's right to tell them. So we have this new medium. We've got an amazing amount of reach. I think Facebook now has 88 to 100 million people tuning in every single night during prime time. Effectively a Super Bowl every single night. We have new ads that don't have to be spammy. And then we have better targeting and better capabilities now than we ever had on TV and print. On digital advertising on Facebook, we've got 91% accuracy versus a cookie-targeted ad of 27%. So we're actually able to, for the first time, segment audiences in profound ways and tell a different story to each of them. It would make sense that you'd want to tell a different story to me than a 50-year-old man. But on TV, we've had to create the same story for everyone and basically, optimize to the lowest common denominator. But now I don't have to do that. I also had to make my story relevant for 6 months. Now, I can actually inject stories into real time, into the moment, and be relevant right there at that time. So things are changing, and that's evolving. We're on your mobile, we're on desktop, we're where you are. But that is also causing problems for brands. How do I take advantage of this and react and be where people are at that moment all the time, but without something that my intern developed as a piece of content at that moment, at that time? How do I take what I've been doing on TV and print and actually translate that to this new environment and to this new canvas? That's really been one thing that's been screwing brands up, is how do I take advantage of that workflow? How do I do it? And I think, the first question is how do I take something that normally I spend a couple months developing and then 6 months running and produce that every single day? And I think that everyone's been thinking that you have to create a war room. And a war room is great. Aspirationally, I'd say brands in the next 2 years want 50% of their content to be real time. But we have to think about that in scalable, sustainable ways, not in ways that are just, for right now and for this small thing that's siloed. You have to think about, if I'm going to take advantage of real time for the next 10 years, I can't just do it by having 20 interns sitting in a room monitoring. I need to plan for these moments. So I would expect that as brands move to a 50% real-time strategy, that 90% of that 50% is pre-planned real-time moments. So think about a brand that's a sleep drug. Every night, millions of people are tweeting that they can't sleep. Well, they can already create that content ahead of time, but serve it to those people as though they're in the moment. If I'm sponsoring a football game, I know that there's about 3 exciting things that can happen in a football game. 0 if you ask me, but 3 exciting things for football fans, right? Like, you can do a touchdown, you can have a first down, or you can kick a field goal. Those are all things that I can pre-plan against ahead of time. So brands need to organize in different ways. But it also means involving different stakeholders at different times in the process. You've got your digital agency that's been typically running all of these ads, and then people have also had the organic agency or their earned social media agency, and then they've had their content agency that's doing TV. In the new environment, those things all now go together. Content wants to be quality, so it wants to be TV production quality. But it needs distribution. To think that you can have a pure organic strategy is unfortunately a myth at this point. In order to get anything but, a 3% distribution against an owned fan base or an owned follower base, you actually have to pay for that distribution. So thinking about how do I coordinate my content efforts with my paid efforts, but have that data feedback loop back. That's one of the most powerful things that I think we have now in storytelling, is that we've always been able to tell stories, and TV, we've always been able to get reach. But now we actually have data. So I can tell you, if you gave me 5 different stories, which stories are selling the most product and to whom. And then if you have enough variations of it, you can start to unpack the actual variables as to why. So no longer are we in this sort of TV construct where you have a constant sort of controlled market test going on and you're always knowing that it's working, but you don't know what works or how it works. through digital distribution of stories, we can now unpack the actual isolated elements of the individual aspects of the stories that work to be able to optimize those stories over time, and hopefully not just be a siloed layer distribution channel for the stories, but figure out how to, one, give that data feedback loop back to the places where the stories are being told, and two, act as a layer on top of everything else that's going on. So, you know, this sounds really aspirational, like, great, we're going to story tell on digital now instead of getting really high engagement rates on cats, because cats probably don't sell shampoo and product images do. But, you know, we've actually put this into practice. So this is a case study that we did with Facebook, Budweiser, and Vice. So Vice is a creative shop that has done a lot of work on TV, and it's a very specific storyteller. Hadn't done a ton on digital. Budweiser is a very large brand, and Facebook is a very large platform. So we all got together, and Budweiser in America had a sort of a problem statement that they wanted us to deliver against, which is that they weren't finding that they had a ton of relevancy against 21 to 27-year-old young adults. They just weren't drinking Bud Heavy. Shocking. So Budweiser every summer does a music festival. And so what they wanted to do is take the assets from their music festival and figure out how to translate that into a campaign with the KPI of relevancy against 21 through 27-year-olds. So using the targeting of Facebook, we were actually able to explicitly target 21 through 27-year-olds with these stories about musicians, artists, and how they sort of made their career. Very, very little Bud branding, a couple product placement, but mostly just about the artists and their stories. We then created segments within the 21 through 27-year-old group of the different users, so that we were actually able to optimize not only which stories were going to be the best ones to get distribution against, but actually optimize within the 21 through 27-year-old segments to put the right stories in front of the right segments. So if someone had a particular affinity towards, you know, electronic music and it was an electronic artist, we would understand that and be able to give even more frequency and impression and penetration to those users versus users that maybe liked rock music more. So the results aren't public yet, but I wouldn't be using this as a case study if they weren't absolutely phenomenal as we're coming out and getting the results. And when we're looking at a result here, the result was brand effect measured by Nielsen on the KPI of relevance. We're also now able to measure beer sales as well using data logics. So as this data becomes public, it's actually going to unfold for you guys what we were able to do in terms of moving a whole group of people in mass, the 21 through 27-year-olds in the US, to think about Budweiser differently and then ultimately have that lead towards end sales in the end. So long story short, I think we've entered this new digital area of storytelling rather than ads. I think content now is your ad, and the more that brands can think about how do I put something into someone's feed, into the right person's feed at the right time with content that they actually want to see, right? Seeing being the first KPI, because that's what's going to move people to change their perception of your brand or to go buy your brand. And then think about engagement as a signal of incrementality, of if they're engaging, then that's an extra added layer that really only exists now on the web. It never existed on TV. And that's something that you want to take as a signal that this content is resonating at higher levels. But first and foremost, you want to be able to put something within someone's feed that's a story that's going to be relevant for them at that moment upon that impression. That's all I've got.